The readings this morning are from Hosea and 1 Corinthians. The first scripture comes from the book of Hosea. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. The more I called them, the further they went from me. They kept sacrificing to the Baals, and they burned incense to idols. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. I took them up in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with bands of human kindness, with cords of love. I treated them like those who lift infants to their cheeks. I bent down to them and fed them. And from 1 Corinthians, love puts up with all things, trusts all things, hopes for all things, endures all things. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
You know, nothing brings greater joy to life than relationships, and nothing brings greater pain And this morning, I want to address the second half of that sentence. Because so often, relationships, folks, are messy. We don't always get the families that we want, or the friendships, or the right relationships that we want, or we think we have the right relationship, or the perfect marriage, or the perfect family, the perfect friendship, until it isn't. I mean, something happens, or it falls apart, or someone passes away, or it's us. None of us are perfect. I mean, we are imperfect people in search of perfect relationships, aren't we? And that's a recipe for disappointment. Disappointment is the gap of reality of that experience and the expectation that we have. And we've all been there, in that gap, haven't we? And some of you might just be in that gap right now. Last week I Googled the words, the most disappointed parent in the whole world. And what I came up with, number one, was this letter by a father in the United Kingdom to his 3 adult children. And you might have heard about this, and it might have resonated with a lot of people here because the letter went really, really viral. And here's a part of what that letter said. Dear all 3. I mean, he's so disappointed that he doesn't even mention them by name. Dear all 3. It's obvious that none of you has the faintest notion of the bitter disappointment each of you has in your own way dished out to us. We are constantly regaled with chapter and verse of the happy, successful lives of the families and friends and relatives and being asked of our own news of our own children and grandchildren. And I wonder if you realize how we feel. I mean, we have nothing to say. I can tell you that for one, and I sense Mom feels the same, have had enough of being forced to live through the never-ending bad dream of our children's underachievement and domestic ineptitudes. And in case his children didn't get the point, he signs off with this. I am bitterly, bitterly disappointed, Dad. Well, it sure makes you feel better about your own family, doesn't it? And where do you go with a heart that's broken and disappointed in a world where relationships are often so messy? Well, the Bible provides us with a story of a God who is disappointed in his children. And yet God responds in a way that is beyond comprehension. And what God does, God provides us with a foundation out of which we can love those who disappoint us. So this morning, we heard a reading from the Old Testament book of Hosea. Now, Hosea was a prophet. And that is, he was a spokesperson for God. He spoke God's words to the people. And he was living in this northern kingdom of Israel during a time of great national upheaval and turmoil that ultimately would not end well for Israel. But Hosea understood what God was feeling. He understood God's disappointment, and he shared God's disappointment with the people using the image of a parent-child relationship. He says, here's how God is feeling. When Israel was a child, I loved him. And out of Egypt I called my son. But the more I called them, the further they went from me. They kept sacrificing to the Baals, and they burned incense to idols. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim, another word for Israel. It is I who taught them to walk. I who took them up in my arms, but they didn't know that I healed them. I led them with bands of human kindness and with cords of love. And then God goes on to say, here are those consequences as a result of living outside relationship with me. Not the punishment or the judgment for, but the consequences of being outside that relationship. And he says, you, Israel, you will return to the land of Egypt, and the Assyrians will be your king because you refused to return to me. And my people are bent on turning away from me. Friends, this is us. I mean, God is heartbroken. God is heartbroken as he looks at the world as it is and the condition of our relationship with God. I mean, it's as if God was saying, how could you not know that I love you? It's because you focused totally on yourselves and forgot all about me. I mean, even when you were in the midst of trouble, I was alongside you, ready to help you, ready to comfort you. But you turned away from me. There were times you looked for meaning in other things, other gods like money or sex or sports or power or career or another person. You know, I thought our relationship would be very different, that we would always be close. God is heartbroken. God is disappointed. And how does God respond? God says this, how can I give up on you? How can I hand you over? My heart winces within me, and yet my compassion grows warm and tender. I mean, do you hear the pain that God is feeling inside? God knows the pain of rejection. And so often in our relationships, what happens? You reject me, I reject you. You hurt me, I hurt you. You do something good for me, and I do something good for you. You give me what I want, I give you what I want. But God is not like that. That's not what God does. God says, I won't act on the heat of my anger. I won't return to destroy. For I am God and not a human being. I'm the Holy One in your midst. And what we discover is this. It's love. You know, a few weeks ago we learned that it's the kind of love that gives value, not takes, not reacts. The kind of love that gives value. I mean, God is saying, I can't stop loving you because I promised. You know, when my son was little, we had a favorite book. And as a matter of fact, I read it to him again last week, and he's 34 years old. And I even went so far as, a few years ago, recording it and sending it to him so he could always hear me read this book. And now he can read it to his kids. It's I'll Love You Forever. Do you know this book? Yeah? And did you know that there's an important story behind this book? First, let's hear the story. A mother held her new baby, and she very slowly rocked him back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And while she held him, she sang, I'll love you forever. I like you for always. As long as I'm living, my baby, you'll be. Well, the baby grew, and he grew, and he grew, and he grew, and he grew until he was 2 years old. And he ran all around the house, and he pulled all the books off the shelves, and he pulled all the food out of the refrigerator, and he took the others' kids' watch, and he flushed it down the toilet. And sometimes his mother would say, this kid is driving me crazy. But at nighttime, when that 2-year-old was quiet, she opened the door to his room and crawled across the floor, and she looked up over the side of his bed, and if he was really asleep, she would pick him up and rocked him back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And while she rocked him, she sang, I'll love you forever. I'll like you for always. As long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. The little boy grew. And he grew and he grew and he grew and he grew till he was 9 years old. And he never wanted to come in for dinner. And he never wanted to take a bath. And when Grandma visited, he always said bad words. Sometimes his mother wanted to sell him to the zoo. But at nighttime, when he was asleep, The mother quietly opened the door to his room and crawled across that floor and looked up over the side of the bed. And if he was really asleep, she picked up that 9-year-old boy and she rocked him back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And while she rocked him, she sang, "I'll love you forever. I'll like you for always. As long as I'm living, my baby you'll be." Well, of course, the boy grew. And he grew and he grew and he grew and he grew till he was a teenager. And he had strange friends and he wore strange clothes and he listened to strange music. And sometimes his mother felt like she was in the zoo. But at nighttime, when that teenager was asleep, the mother opened the door to his room and crawled across the floor and looked up over the side of the bed. If he was really asleep, she picked up that great big boy and she rocked him back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And while she rocked him, she sang, "I'll love you forever. I'll like you for always. As long as I'm living, my baby will be." Well, that teenager grew. And he grew, and he grew, and he grew, and he grew until he was a grown-up man, and he left home, and he got a house across town. But sometimes on dark nights, the mother got into the car, and she drove across the town, and it gets a little creepy. And if all the lights in her son's house were out, she opened up that bedroom window, and she crawled across the floor, and she looked up over the side of his bed, and if that great big man was really asleep, she picked him up and she rocked him back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And while she rocked him, she sang, "I'll love you forever. I'll like you for always. As long as I'm living, my baby you'll be." Well, that mother, she got older. She got older and older and older. And one day she called up her son and she said, "You better come and see me because I'm very old and very sick." So her son came to see her. And when he came in the door, she tried to sing the song. She sang, "I'll love you forever. I'll like you for always." But she couldn't finish because she was too old and too sick. I mean, it's kind of an emotional story. So the son went to his mother. And he picked her up and he rocked her back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And he sang this song. "I'll love you forever. I'll like you for always. As long as I'm living, my mommy you'll be." And when that son came home that night, he stood for a long time at the top of the stairs. And then he went into the room where his very new baby daughter was. And she was sleeping. And he picked her up in his arms and he slowly rocked her back and forth, and back and forth, and back and forth. And as he rocked her, he sang, "I'll love you forever. I'll like you for always. As long as I'm living, my baby you'll be." And the song kept going. Well, now Robert Munsch wrote the story. But it wasn't a story that he experienced. I mean, when he was young, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And when he was in the 5th grade, he remembered being so depressed that he didn't want to live anymore. I mean, this was the 5th grade, folks. Later in life, he was also diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, and in his effort to medicate himself, he became addicted to drugs and alcohol, and eventually he found his way to Alcoholics Anonymous. And as a young adult, he studied 7 years to be a Jesuit priest, but he was so filled with doubts and darkness that he took a different direction. Well, eventually he married. And his wife became pregnant, but their child was stillborn. And she became pregnant again. And again, this child was also stillborn. And she never got pregnant again. She never got to hold her child in her arms. And he never got to do that either. But one day, these words came to mind as he thought about the 2 children that he never had a chance to hold in his arms. And he decided to write a story where love would be stronger than death. You see, somehow, we get the sense that if we could just love enough, everything would be okay. That all our problems would just disappear. And then we discover that we can't. We can't love enough. And sometimes we can't even love at all. I mean, there's something that's happened. Some estrangement, some loss, some betrayal, some disappointment or hurt or pain. And I mean, what do we do when your love is not enough? What do we do with this pain and this disappointment that we carry inside? And isn't it why we are all here, folks? I mean, for many of us, we come to this place, a disappointed, heartbroken people, to meet a disappointed, heartbroken God. A God who says, I will do for you what you cannot do for yourself. I will love you forever. And how do you bring a disappointed heart to God? Well, I think first we talk to God about our disappointed heart. I mean, Jesus said, go to your room and shut the door and talk to God. I mean, so often we carry that disappointment inside and we don't share it with anyone. And it begins to leak out. It spills out to the people around us. You know, last week I came home and I just wasn't acting my usual self. And Jeff said, what's up? And of course I said nothing. When in fact I had just gotten off the phone with a person who I have been trying to mentor for the last 5 years. It's someone we've both been trying to mentor, actually, and who was in trouble again. And my disappointment leaked out, affecting the way that I responded to the most important person in my life. You see, sometimes we come here, folks, and we clean up so well, and on the outside it appears that you all have your lives together, and I mean, you're the perfect people, aren't you? But inside, you know better. On the inside, so many of us are suffering. Because you see, none of us is perfect. None of us here is perfect. And apart from God, I'm a mess. And if I'm not a mess today, folks, I'm just one bad choice from being a mess. And God knows that. God knows us. This is the place that whatever it is that we carry on the inside, we can let go of that. Bring it to a God who embraces, whose arms are waiting to receive us just as we are. God who says, I can do for you what you cannot do for yourself. A love that helps me see what God sees. It's what the Apostle Paul reminds us. A love that puts up with all things, trusts in all things, and hopes for all things, endures all things. Love never fails. Friends, on my own, I can't love that way. But that kind of love is possible when we let God dwell within us. Let's pray. Holy God, we bring our hearts to you today with all of the joy and all of the disappointment that we carry, the loneliness and the resentment. Thank you for your love. Thank you for a love that can do far more than we can do for ourselves. A love that will be with us forever. Help us to allow your love to flow in us and through us. We pray all this in the words that Jesus taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom